The night Kelsey Briar Hale vanished in Conroe, Texas, a thin mist still clung to the surface of Longmire Road, as though it hadn't yet had time to burn off in the cold late autumn wind. The clock read 8:50 p.m. when the 17-year-old walked out of Randall's grocery, stepping under the pale yellow lights, a small plastic bag of groceries for dinner cradled in her arms. A neighbor saw Kelsey pass the wooden fence, her red hoodie standing out against the damp night, and that was the last time anyone in the neighborhood saw her upright on her own 2 feet. Just minutes later, the shadow of a dark-colored pickup glided across the grainy frame of a VHS security camera on that same stretch of road before disappearing into the trees along the shoulder. No one knew that what happened in the next 60 minutes would haunt Conroe for nearly a quarter century. Before we dive deeper into the story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the latest cases. On a late autumn evening in 1999, in Conroe, Texas, the air carried the distinctive chill of East Texas as winter approached. A thin fog lay over the glossy pavement, lightly coating rooftops and the rows of trees that lined the residential streets. Wind whistled through the branches of old pines, blending with the smell of wet leaves and rain-soaked earth, wrapping the small town in a cold, quiet blanket that somehow felt both peaceful and vaguely unsettling. Under the faint yellow glow spilling from the little corner grocery store on Longmire Road, 17-year-old Kelsey Briar Hale stepped outside, carrying a few small items, a granola bar, a bottle of water, and a magazine she'd just bought. Her thin denim jacket wasn't warm enough, so she pulled the collar up tight. Her breath came out in white puffs in the biting air. The store door closed behind her, returning the street to the stillness typical of a weekend night in a small town. Kelsey walked briskly along the concrete sidewalk that led into the neighborhood, where tall streetlights cast weak pools of light, leaving patches of darkness in between. A few locals still out on their porches, putting things away or saying goodnight, noticed her passing by. Nothing seemed unusual. It was just Kelsey Hale, always walking fast, head slightly down when the weather turned cold, the familiar figure of a teenager hurrying home after running an errand. The farther she got from the shopping area, the emptier the road became. Wooden fences, dark bushes, and long shadows from tree trunks lined both sides. Occasionally a car whooshed by in the distance, but mostly there was just the wind threading through the leaves. On any other night, those ordinary sounds wouldn't have registered, but that night they rang sharper, colder, almost like a warning. At the Hale house, everything seemed normal at first. Kelsey sometimes stopped at a friend's, or lingered somewhere, so her not being home right on time didn't immediately worry anyone. But then nearly an hour passed, the landline went unanswered, texts went unreplied. Her mother called a few of Kelsey's close friends. No one had seen her since school let out. Her father grabbed his keys, drove the route she usually walked, sweeping his headlights over every dark stretch, every turn, every clump of bushes. Nothing. No sign of her. No trace that Kelsey had ever walked that road just minutes from home. The family felt dread spreading like the darkness outside seeping into the house. The neighborhood's familiar silence, usually comforting, suddenly felt heavy and oppressive. When the clock passed the latest Kelsey had ever been out, worry turned to panic. They knocked on neighbors' doors, hoping someone had seen her one more time. Everyone shook their heads. They'd only seen her walk past earlier, then nothing. No one heard anything unusual. No one noticed anything strange. It was as if the familiar road had simply swallowed her into its own darkness. With no clues left to cling to, and the sense of danger growing sharper, the Hales did the only thing left. They called the police to report that their 17-year-old daughter, who lived just a few minutes' walk away, had vanished without a trace on a perfectly quiet Conroe night. When the missing person call from the Hale family came in, the first Montgomery County Sheriff's Office patrol car arrived within minutes, headlights cutting through the thin fog on Longmire Road. The sudden flash of red and blue lights in the silent night woke the whole block, though no one yet knew exactly what was happening, except the Hales, who stood shivering as the cold tightened around them. The officers' first move was to sweep the route Kelsey should have taken home. Flashlights swept every shadow, every narrow path along the wooden fences, every dew-wet lawn. Their boots echoed softly on the concrete. The cautious, deliberate sound of people who knew every passing minute mattered. By day this road could feel friendly. People out walking dogs, kids riding bikes. But at night, especially a cold late fall night, it was different. Silent, dark, and vaguely unsettling. One deputy spotted faint impressions in the grass beside the road, like small footprints pressed into the soft post-rain ground, but nothing could be confirmed. People walked here all day. Footprints were normal. They kept moving, shining lights between tree trunks, looking for anything Kelsey might have dropped, intentionally or during a struggle. After a while, one officer bent down and picked up a small object, a pale blue plastic bottle cap. He bagged it by the book, but it was just random roadside litter, not enough to tie to the disappearance. A few yards away, a brown paper bag had blown onto the grass. Same story, common near any commercial strip. The deputies didn't jump to conclusions. They kept scanning muddy patches left by the earlier rain, sifting through wet leaves for anything distinctive, a bracelet, a scrap of clothing, anything she'd been carrying. Finding nothing obvious, they widened the search to dead-end streets off Longmire, a small undeveloped wooded area behind the houses, and a half-built construction site at the end of the road. Every direction was possible, because she'd vanished so close to home, and that made the search harder. Meanwhile, dispatch called in extra units. A perimeter was set up at both ends of the stretch, one side bordering the neighborhood, the other the wavy oak woods. Once the boundaries were marked, night patrol units across the area were alerted immediately. Cars on nearby major roads, Cartwright, League Line, Wilson Road, received Kelsey's preliminary description, including what she was wearing and her last known direction. Other units swept parks, small shopping centers, parking lots, 24-hour gas stations, anywhere a teenager might end up if something went wrong. At the Hale house, detectives took detailed statements from her parents, when she left, whether she planned to meet anyone, if she had a pager or phone, how her mood had been. Every question aimed to build a clearer timeline of her movements. The more the family answered, the more their fear showed. There was no reason Kelsey would leave the area or disappear voluntarily. No major friend drama, no signs of running away, no history of going off the grid. That made everything far more alarming. Another team went door to door again, asking if anyone had noticed anything odd that night. A few remembered seeing Kelsey walk by, exactly as the family described. But after that, nothing. No screams, no loud noises, no suspicious vehicles. The complete absence of signs only deepened the mystery. As the clock ticked past midnight, investigators asked the first real question of the case. Where exactly did Kelsey disappear? How does a 17-year-old girl evaporate from a street just minutes from her house? That's when they realized this wasn't simply a kid staying out late. Something had happened on that seemingly peaceful Conroe Road, and the first solid clue still hadn't surfaced. The town drifted toward sleep, but the police search was only getting started. As the search pushed deeper into the wavy oak woods, a small but thick patch, just a couple hundred yards behind the houses, the flashlights started picking up things that didn't appear in the rest of the neighborhood: disturbed leaves, slightly sunken ground, patches of grass pressed flat in a line leading from the road into the tree line. Nothing clear enough to call a crime scene, but impossible to ignore when they ran in the exact direction Kelsey would have passed. One deputy stopped at what looked like a small bright scrap half buried in wet leaves. Under the beam it turned out to be a thin piece of torn fabric, small enough to be part of a paper bag or a corner of clothing. No one could say it belonged to Kelsey, but the way it was pressed into the dirt suggested it fell during hurried movement. Not far away, another officer noticed a dull metal object, a plain keychain, the common drugstore kind. They bagged it carefully and noted the location, but didn't get excited. A dropped keychain near woods wasn't unusual. What was unusual was finding it right where it shouldn't be. Hours after a 17-year-old girl went missing. The flattened grass trails also suggested recent passage. Someone or something had moved through not long ago. The ground was still damp, making compressions more visible than normal, but not sharp enough to become clear footprints. Some streaks looked like light drag marks. Most were just vague, half sneaker tread, half broken twigs. Deputies photographed everything, knowing these were only possible leads, not evidence. Leaves could have been there for days, and woods next to houses always carry mixed tracks from people, animals, and wind. Still, if even one item was connected, it could point the way forward. A few steps farther in, flashlight beams caught something that made everyone freeze. Curved tire impressions in the dirt, running several yards before fading on drier ground. Not footprints, not drag marks, definitely tire tracks. No one could identify the vehicle type from the faint marks on soft soil, but the rounded shape and tread pattern made it clear a vehicle had stopped or moved through the area shortly before the search teams arrived. Even more telling, the tracks weren't on the main road or a parking area, but on a narrow dirt path where vehicles had no normal reason to be at night. The deputies spent extra time examining the surrounding area: local resident's truck, city worker, someone lost, no one knew, but this was the first thing that couldn't be ignored: an unexplained vehicle in a place it shouldn't have been. While one group kept combing the trees, another widened the search along the dirt road into the woods. Soon they found more scattered small items: a curved piece of plastic like from a crushed bottle, a thin cord, a rain-smeared piece of paper with ink run together and illegible. All could be blown-in trash, or they could have belonged to Kelsey. Everything in those woods could be random or deliberate, and that uncertainty made the search heavier. By near dawn, only a hazy picture had emerged. Kelsey left the store, was last seen on a quiet stretch of road, and somewhere near Wavy Oak Woods, scattered clues suggested movement, a second person's presence, and possibly a vehicle that stopped shortly after she vanished. But nothing tied it all together yet. No conclusion was solid. The only thing everyone agreed on was that Kelsey couldn't simply vanish from a place like this without leaving some trace. And those small items, incomplete marks, and tire tracks would become the first fragile but essential leads into the next phase of the investigation. By the time the sky began to lighten, the scattered objects and incomplete traces around Wavy Oak Woods pushed investigators to the next step: pinpoint exactly who last saw Kelsey and what really happened in the short window between her leaving the grocery store and disappearing on the familiar road home. But when detectives went back through the neighborhood, collecting initial statements from residents along Longmire Road, they quickly ran into the hardest part of any missing person case: human memory is rarely consistent, and even less often accurate. The first neighbor insisted he'd seen Kelsey walk past his yard about an hour earlier, but when pressed, what was she wearing, walking fast or slow, carrying anything? He hesitated and changed details. He admitted the light was bad. He might have mistaken her for another girl in the neighborhood. An elderly woman 2 houses down said she hadn't seen Kelsey, but thought she heard someone walk by. When asked if she was sure it was a girl, she replied softly that she was just guessing. The wind was strong, everything sounded distorted. A young couple at the end of the street said they thought they saw Kelsey while pulling into their driveway, but it was only a glance from inside the car, so they weren't sure it was really her. Several others hadn't been outside and heard nothing useful. Those flickering, contradictory accounts only confused things more. Kelsey lived in a small everybody-knows-everybody neighborhood, yet that very familiarity bred casual observation. No one paid close attention because nothing bad ever happened. The only near certainty was that several people had seen her heading home, but no one agreed on the time, her clothes, or even her exact direction. Their statements were like mismatched puzzle pieces. The harder you tried to force them together, the messier the picture got. When investigators widened the canvas to surrounding areas, a middle-aged man near the Longmire, Cartwright intersection said he saw a suspicious vehicle that night. He described it as dark-colored, maybe a pickup, maybe an SUV, maybe neither. Pressed for details, he admitted his windows were fogged from the cold, and he'd only caught the glimpse reflected in his living room TV screen. The only thing he was sure of was that the vehicle sat at the curb kind of long, for an amount of time he couldn't pin down. Another young guy nearby said he saw 2 people standing near the edge of the road sometime that evening, but when asked where exactly, what they looked like, male or female, he said he couldn't remember, and wasn't even sure it was the same night Kelsey disappeared or the night before. Instead of narrowing the focus, every statement blurred it further, like a noisy video where you can't make out the real image. That night Longmire Road was a street everyone used but no one truly saw. Detectives noted that unreliable witness memory was becoming the biggest obstacle. Each person remembered a fragment, each added or dropped a detail, and in a normally quiet town any oddity, a car parked too long, a figure walking the wrong way, a strange sound, could be exaggerated or misremembered. Then came one statement that made the file even murkier. A woman claimed she saw a girl in a bright-colored top with a man wearing a hat, but when questioned, she admitted she was pretty far away, and it was very dark. She thought it was Kelsey because the build was similar, but she couldn't swear to it. So instead of a breakthrough, investigators ended up with a pile of vague, overlapping, and sometimes contradictory information. No two witnesses described the same thing. No one could consistently describe the vehicle. No one knew what was real, and what was just a trick of the dark. Every statement was carefully documented, but after hours of interviews, the detectives were still exactly where they started. No clear picture, no clear vehicle, and no one who actually knew where Kelsey went after leaving the store. The only thing they knew for certain was that the place the 17-year-old disappeared lay somewhere inside that tangle of stories, but which parts were true, nobody yet knew. From the early 2000s onward, Kelsey's disappearance entered a long fading phase in the town's memory, but for the police and the Hale family, the case never truly went cold. What they had in the first year, a few scattered items, wildly contradictory witness statements, and unidentified tire tracks, never produced a clear investigative path. Worse, the next decade piled even thicker fog over the case, as new leads didn't bring answers. They only sent the search farther off course. The first false lead arrived in February 2000, when an anonymous letter was mailed to the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. On cheap photocopy paper, the writer claimed Kelsey had been taken by a group of young men to Louisiana and was being held in an abandoned house near the state line. No names, no descriptions, no signature. The handwriting was scrawled, with several words scratched out and rewritten, suggesting either an attempt to disguise it or simply a desire to cause panic. Police couldn't ignore it. Every tip had to be checked. 2 detectives were sent to the described area, searched abandoned houses, interviewed locals, but found zero trace, no witnesses, no belongings, no sign of a young woman being held. After 2 weeks, they concluded the letter was a hoax, likely someone craving attention or pulling a cruel prank. Still, it stalled the real investigation for almost a month. In 2002, a man called the tip line claiming he was certain he'd seen a girl who looked exactly like Kelsey working at a beachside store in Galveston. He gave detailed descriptions, hair, build, even the way she stood behind the register, and said she seemed nervous when stared at. For the first time in years, the Hales felt real hope. But when deputies arrived, checked every shop, reviewed security footage, and spoke to employees, the truth came out. The girl was a local teenager who simply resembled Kelsey. Another crushing false alarm that didn't just disappoint investigators, it was brutal for the family, losing their daughter once, then having their hearts ripped out every time hope flared and died. In 2004, a homeless man arrested in Houston for disorderly conduct suddenly confessed he'd killed a girl in Conroe a few years back. No one believed him at first. False confessions are common in high-profile cases, but procedures still had to be followed. Interrogation, timeline checks, location verification. His story fell apart immediately. Wrong streets, completely wrong victim description, didn't even know where Conroe was relative to Houston. Eventually, he admitted he just wanted a jail cell with air conditioning. Another dead end that burned time and energy. For years, every lead was a door that cracked open, then slammed shut, leaving only wasted time and deeper despair. Then, in 2005, something small but heavy enough to rattle the file, a morning walker in Wavy Oak Woods found a long brown hair caught on a low branch near the original 1999 search area, Kelsey's hair color. Investigators collected and stored it carefully. In 2005, DNA technology, wasn't sensitive enough to test such a tiny sample, so it went into evidence storage with the hope it could be useful later. In 2010, when the cold case unit reopened old files to retest evidence with improved DNA methods, the hair was finally analyzed. Result: not Kelsey's. Didn't match any Hale family member. Didn't match anyone ever investigated, and crucially, the DNA profile wasn't in any criminal database, meaning it belonged to an unknown person who had been in the exact area where Kelsey vanished, but with no clear connection. A clue that didn't point anywhere yet couldn't be dismissed. It turned a stalled case into a more tangled one. If it wasn't Kelsey's hair, whose was it, and why was it there, right where police always suspected she disappeared? The gap between the file and the truth didn't just grow, it became a genuine maze. Throughout the entire first decade after Kelsey vanished, the investigation was a chain of false hopes, unreliable tips, and leads that ran straight into brick walls. With each passing year, the truth seemed to slip farther away, leaving a forest of unanswered questions no one knew how to start clearing. While the case file gathered dust under layers of bad leads for a full decade, one name from the original 1999 folder never quite disappeared. One the original investigators had noted not as a prime suspect or long-term person of interest, but simply as someone worth talking to, because he lived right along the route. Kelsey walked the night she vanished. Walter Reed Garvey. In the first 4 days after the report came in, when deputies canvassed every house on Longmire Road, they had to speak to anyone who might have seen or heard anything. Garvey lived in a small gray house at the turnoff to Pinecrest, less than a 1-minute walk from where witnesses placed Kelsey. Locals described him as the quiet but polite type, kept to himself, came home from work and shut the door, never caused trouble, never got involved in neighborhood business. When deputies knocked early the morning after the disappearance, Garvey answered in old work clothes, calm to the point many found it odd. He showed no reaction to a teenage neighbor going missing. At the time, that demeanor alone wasn't enough to make him a suspect. Plenty of single men act detached when hearing bad news. He said he'd been home all evening, fixing the wood floor in the back bedroom, something he'd planned for a while. Claimed he hadn't heard anything, hadn't seen anyone pass the windows, hadn't left the house during the window Kelsey vanished. His story didn't contradict any existing evidence, and since he lived alone, there was almost no way to fully verify or disprove it. Asked if he knew Kelsey, or the Hales, he said he only nodded hello to neighbors occasionally, never actually spoken to the girl. The initial interview lasted about 10 minutes, no obvious contradictions, no suspicious behavior, and police left the gray house with no reason to hold him. However, in an internal note, clipped into that year's file, the overnight detective Mark Lafferty wrote one short line at the bottom of the report: Garvey too calm. Eyes never changed when talking about the missing girl. Something off, but don't know what. The note led to no follow-up action. It was just one officer's gut feeling about a loner with zero evidence, no criminal history, and no typical abductor profile. Most later investigators who read the file dismissed it. There was no physical evidence linking Garvey to the scene. Like so many small details from the early days, the items near the woods, the vague witness statements, the note got buried in dozens of other pages and forgotten. The only other noteworthy entry from that year, on November 13, 1999, when police returned to the area to shift search patterns, Garvey wasn't home. An officer stopped by for follow-up questions, no answer. The report noted, unable to determine whereabouts, no signs of hurried departure. When asked the next day, Garvey said he'd gone shopping in the Woodlands and stayed overnight at a friend's. No one had reason to doubt it then, especially with zero physical evidence against him. In the 1999-2000 context, with dozens of conflicting statements and false trails, Walter Garvey was simply someone police had cleared and moved off the priority list for lack of anything solid. But one tiny detail from that same year kept nagging Detective Lafferty, though he could never prove anything. When asked if he'd heard any strange noises that night, Garvey immediately said no. Then, minutes later, added, "Well, something like a tree falling in the woods, but I'm not sure." The two contradictory answers, seconds apart, struck Lafferty as odd. But with no one else reporting a noise, and wavy oak woods known for wind sounds, it was brushed off. As the years rolled on, with anonymous letters, fake sightings, bogus confessions, and the non-matching hair, Garvey's name sank into the shadows of the file. No one knew it would resurface more than 2 decades later, with completely different weight. In 2005, 6 years in with zero progress, another strange clue surfaced, one everyone first thought might be the breakthrough, only to make the case messier. A middle-aged man who walked the old trails in wavy oak woods every morning for exercise, spotted something glinting on a low branch, a long light brown hair, Kelsey's color. It wasn't on the ground, but hooked about 3 feet up, as if someone or something had brushed past. He turned it in immediately, hoping against hope it could finally answer what happened that night. For the cold case unit, the hair was worth storing, but in 2005 DNA tech couldn't pull a profile from a hair without a root, so it was sealed and placed in evidence storage, where it sat in darkness for another 5 years. What made the hair eerie wasn't just when it was found, but exactly where, smack in the middle of the original 1999 search zone. When it was finally tested in 2010 with upgraded DNA methods, everyone held their breath. If it was Kelsey's, it could prove she'd gone deeper into the woods, maybe even been taken there. The result was another gut punch, not Kelsey's. Didn't match the Hales, didn't match any known offender in Texas databases. It belonged to a complete unknown who had been right in the suspected area, yet tied to nothing else. The most promising clue of 2010 turned into the biggest red herring of that era, but that wasn't the last mistake of 2010. That same year, an anonymous email landed in the sheriff's office inbox. One short line: "The girl is being kept in a wooden house near TX 105. Check behind the abandoned lot." No name, no further description, no photos. But wooden house and TX 105 rang bells. The highway cuts through an area full of half-built structures and old sheds sometimes used by the homeless. Police couldn't risk ignoring it. 2 patrol teams were sent immediately. They found an actual wooden house, small, leaning, abandoned at least 15 years. Broken windows, rotting siding, part of the back roof collapsed. Inside was inches of dust and zero sign anyone had entered in years. No fresh footprints, no personal items, no strange smells, no body or belongings tied to Kelsey. Expanding behind the property yielded only rusty barrels, old beer cans, and evidence someone had camped a few nights years earlier. Nothing linking to the 1999 missing girl. Still, full reports, photos, and documentation were required before concluding, once again, that the tip was worthless. Veteran cold case detectives were used to vague tips like this. Some came from people who thought they saw something, some from attention seekers, many from people convinced they had psychic insight. The scariest part wasn't the bad tips themselves, it was that every single one, no matter how useless, forced investigators to spend days or weeks checking, because skipping just one could mean missing the only real chance to solve the case. The 2010 non-matching hair and the worthless TX 105 tip added 2 more wrong turns to a case already drowning in noise. Once again the file closed, and the darkness of wavy oak woods kept its secrets into the second decade. Every time investigators moved 1 step forward, the case seemed to shove them 3 steps back, leaving the same unchanging question: something happened that night. But what? In 2023, 24 years in with the case not having budged an inch, fate introduced a new player, Megan Rowland, 31, veterinary technician, who bought Walter Reed Garvey's old house after he died of heart failure. The little gray house tucked into quiet Pinecrest looked unremarkable, except for being run down and in need of work. For Megan it was just a cheap starter home, until she started cleaning the back bedroom, the very room Garvey told police in 1999 he'd been fixing the wood floor the night Kelsey vanished. The first days were normal, sweeping new light bulbs, patching peeling paint, but when she began stripping old wallpaper to repaint, she froze. One section of drywall in the corner looked wrong. It was smoother, lighter colored, and showed none of the aging the rest of the wall had. The surrounding drywall was yellowed with time. This patch was still almost white, and felt like different material. Any contractor would spot immediately it had been replaced at a completely different time. Megan figured Garvey had repaired some damage, normal in an old house. But up close she noticed the paint at the edges was slightly off-tone, as if painted by different people years apart. The seam between the old and new drywall was filled clumsily, not the clean work of a professional. It looked rushed, then touched up again years later. What really set off alarm bells were the screws. 4 corner screws were exposed, and inconsistent. Some were heavily rusted, dark brown with age, others were newer, only lightly oxidized. Most people would overlook it, but Megan didn't. She called an electrician to check for old wiring, and he was the first to voice what made her blood run cold. "This wall has been taken out and put back at least twice, maybe 3 times. Nobody does that unless they're hiding something." The words hung in the silent room. Twice in 20 years, why would a man living alone repeatedly tear out the same small section of non-structural wall? Megan didn't know who Garvey was or that he'd ever been questioned in 1999. But when she mentioned the odd repairs to a neighbor, an older woman replied with one chilling sentence, "That house got visited by police back in '99. That was enough." Megan called the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office. When investigators arrived, it took only minutes to confirm she wasn't exaggerating. The drywall really was significantly newer. The paint edges really were mismatched. The screws really were different ages. All of it abnormal, and the most nonsensical part, this was the home of a solitary man, with no record of home renovations, no permits, no hired help, and no reason to repeatedly remove and replace a small, unimportant wall section. One deputy said out loud, what everyone was thinking, if these signs showed up in any other case, they'd be giant red flags. When they pulled the drywall panel off, fine dust fell like snow. Behind it was a narrow cavity, no wider than a grown person crouching, and that's when twist #5 appeared. In the dusty darkness, a flashlight beam caught a small soft object wedged in a corner of the framing, a torn piece of red fabric, not a full shirt or scarf, just a ragged scrap as if ripped from a larger garment. It was old, caked in dust, stained dark in places, stiff with age, but the red matched exactly the red hoodie Kelsey wore the night she disappeared. The color her family described countless times in the early years. The room went dead silent. No one spoke for several long seconds. Then the lead investigator said only, "We're reopening the Garvey file." What Megan had accidentally uncovered in that old house suddenly cracked open a door the case hadn't touched in over 2 decades. A door hidden inside the wall of the very man questioned and dismissed in 1999. And this time, no one was calling Walter Reed Garvey an old cleared person of interest anymore. When the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office officially took control of the house following Megan Rowland's report, the atmosphere inside the old gray wooden home changed completely. If in Part 8 the discovery of the red fabric scrap was only the first sign that the wall was hiding something abnormal, then the next day, when the investigative team returned with full equipment, every detail began to reveal itself more clearly. Even the electrician from the day before was present, just to confirm that repairing the same wall section multiple times was extremely unusual. But it was the investigators who felt the strangest thing in that room, not from the evidence itself, but from the way the space simply didn't fit with the rest of the house's design. As they re-examined the entire back wall, they discovered that not only the drywall panel Megan had pointed out was problematic, but the adjacent area also showed signs of previous tampering. The paint, when examined under special lighting, revealed 2 distinct layers, one old faded almost silver with age, and a newer layer applied only to a narrow section, as if hurriedly painted to cover traces. At several seams, the spackle was thicker than normal, proving someone had tried to smooth out uneven spots, but not a professional. It was sloppy work, likely done by the homeowner himself. One investigator even found a small spot in the corner where the spackle was lumpy, as if it had been applied in multiple layers years apart. That made the lead investigator blurt out, "This person repaired the wall, over and over. Nobody does that without a reason." When they removed another section of adjacent drywall, the mismatched screws appeared again. Some screws were so old, they had large rust blooms. Right next to them were newer screws that only appeared on the market after 2010. This didn't just confirm Megan's suspicions, it raised a far bigger question: who repaired the wall after Garvey died, and why? But that question would have to wait. On the other hand, when they scanned the entire back wall with a thermal camera and a hollow wall detector, the results made everyone's skin crawl. The readings were uneven. Parts of the wall sounded solid when tapped, other parts hollow, and certain spots gave off a strange tone, as if something had once been inside and later removed. Investigator Lewis stood motionless in front of the wall for almost half a minute. He said nothing, but his eyes were clearly replaying every timeline entry in the file. Walter Reed Garvey had told police in 1999 he was fixing the wood floor the night Kelsey vanished. Only now were they realizing he hadn't just fixed the floor, and he may not have done it only once. The multi-layered repair marks proved that wall had been taken apart, put back, painted, taken apart again, over a span that could stretch across 2 decades. Who did it? Garvey? Someone after him? Why repeatedly tear out the same non-structural section that had nothing to do with plumbing, wiring, or anything else with a legitimate reason? There are only a few types of people who do that: people who want to hide something, or people who want to bury their past behind another layer of drywall. A young deputy, still new to the job, flipped through the drywall pieces and muttered that he'd never seen repairs this bizarre. This isn't reinforcement. This is a place someone wanted to keep a hidden cavity. The room itself gave off an indescribable feeling. Old wood smell, decades of dust, time-stained marks, but mixed in was a strange odor. Not exactly mildew, not exactly chemicals, but what veteran investigators call the smell of a place that's been opened and closed many times. No one can describe it precisely, but it's the scent of cut and replaced wood, paint applied over something not completely clean, time disrupted. When the entire cavity was finally exposed, thick dust coated everything, proving the wall had been sealed for many years. Yet at the edges the dust was uneven, thick in some spots, thin in others, suggesting someone had opened it again relatively recently and closed it right back up. That gave the whole team a feeling they didn't dare voice yet, but everyone thought the same thing: something had once been inside this wall, and may have been removed. No one said it out loud, but they all realized this was no longer old house weirdness. This was deliberate, maintained secrecy. That was when one investigator whispered, almost to himself, "We don't know what it is yet, but this room is holding the story Garvey never wanted told." No one knew they had only touched the outermost layer of the truth. The wall had been speaking for 20 years, only no one had listened. When the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office investigators decided to remove the entire back bedroom wall, none of them truly knew what they were about to face. They only had vague signs: old screws next to new ones, layer upon layer of paint, off-color spackle lines, and the inexplicable sense that this wall didn't belong with the rest of the house. But when the final panel was pried from the wooden framing, the room fell into a silence so complete you could hear the dust falling. The youngest investigator's flashlight beam cut into the darkness inside, and everyone stopped breathing. A hollow cavity appeared, less than 3 feet wide, about 1.5 feet deep, only knee-high. Not big enough for an adult to fit inside, but big enough to hide something. The cavity was dry, but coated in dust so thick it looked like white powder, proving it had been sealed for a very long time. Yet that very dust made what was inside stand out in a terrifying way. First they saw the red fabric scrap already collected earlier, wedged in a corner of the framing. When the light swept left, the young investigator froze. Something small and metallic glinted under the dust. He crouched, gently brushed the dust aside with a gloved finger. A rusted star-shaped keychain, with a clear plastic insert, the exact style Kelsey's mother said she used in 1999 to tell apart her school locker keys. No one spoke, only a heavy exhale. A personal item, inside Garvey's secret compartment. The beam moved deeper. This time they saw a small Ziploc bag. The plastic had yellowed with age, but inside was unmistakable. A Conroe High School library with the name Kelsey B. Hale, still faintly legible. Everyone stood frozen. 2 personal items in the same hidden cavity could not be coincidence. Lead investigator Lewis knelt, shone his light closer. The dust wasn't only disturbed by their opening the wall, there were subtle depressions, as if something had once been placed there and removed long ago. That reminded Lewis of the old and new screws, like a reminder the wall may have been opened not once but many times. At the bottom of the cavity, under thick gray dust, another object took shape when lightly wiped, a thin black rubber bracelet with an oval metal plate, now tarnished. The Hale family had reported Kelsey wore exactly that style of rubber bracelet since 10th grade. Third item, more chilling than the first two combined, but what completely shifted the room's atmosphere was when female investigator Riley aimed her light at the right side wooden frame. She leaned in, then looked up pale, a dark streak about 2 inches long. Not large, not bright, but everyone knew what it was. Lewis studied the brown mark under the light, dark, hardened, streaked vertically along the wood grain, the exact pattern left when a liquid dried in a closed space. He didn't need to say it, everyone understood. Riley whispered. Someone touched the wall and bled. Next to the streak, using tweezers, Riley pulled out a long brown hair stuck in the wood grain. No one rushed to test whose it was, but the color, the length, everyone knew it matched exactly the hair the Hale family had described. At that moment, the picture of truth emerged not with noise, but with absolute silence. The team widened the search inside the cavity. On the left side they found a tiny clump of red thread, almost like the binding torn from the hoodie fabric. Beside it, a small white plastic button with K9 stamped on the back, the style commonly sewn on women's hoodies in the late 1990s. Riley checked and immediately cross-referenced old family photos. Kelsey had worn a red hoodie with small white buttons. This could be one of those buttons, lost when the hoodie was yanked or torn. In the lower corner, the largest item, a triangular piece of carpet, no bigger than a hand, with indeterminate stains. The edges were cleanly cut with a sharp blade, not natural wear. Lewis immediately ordered everything sealed, no further touching. But what sent chills down everyone's spine wasn't the quantity of evidence, it was how the items were placed, not jumbled like trash, not random like forgotten junk. They were spread out, as if someone had placed them in at different times. Not intact enough to form a clear crime scene, but enough to suggest this cavity had once been used to hide something likely directly related to Kelsey. A wall opened and closed again and again, a cavity that once held the victim's personal items, a blood streak, a hair, a piece of hoodie, all inside the home of the man questioned, but never deeply investigated in 1990. Lewis stood, stared at the empty cavity like staring into a deep well that had swallowed 2 decades of secrets, and said only one sentence, so low it was almost inaudible. We just found the first place Kelsey ever stopped. But no one yet knew that this wall cavity, with everything inside it, was only the easiest part of the secret Walter Reed Garvey left behind. The harder, more dangerous, truest part of the truth was still waiting somewhere deeper. When the investigative team left Walter Reed Garvey's house that day, the Conroe sky had turned a heavy lid gray, gloomy, as if mirroring everyone's mood. No one said it aloud, but they all felt it. The evidence in the wall cavity was no longer theory or guesswork. It was the first tangible, touchable trace of Kelsey in the 24 years since the night she vanished. That same night, every item was rushed to the Montgomery County Crime Lab. Forensic technicians began work almost immediately, sealing, logging, cataloging each piece with extreme care: the library card, keychain, rubber bracelet, hoodie fabric, scrap, red thread, white button, cut carpet piece, and most crucially, the blood smear and hair stuck to the wooden frame. All samples were given top priority. Technicians first extracted DNA from the hair, using modern amplification techniques unavailable in 1999. Long light brown, no root, but thanks to protein structure and melanin ratio analysis, they obtained enough nuclear DNA for comparison with Kelsey's stored profile. The result came back faster than expected, 99.997% match. The lab emailed an urgent report. Hair recovered from cavity belongs to victim Kelsey Briar Hale. Those few words silenced the command room for several seconds. No more speculation, no more maybe, looks like, same color. This was irrefutable proof Kelsey had been inside Walter Reed Garvey's home. Lead investigator Lewis read the result 4 times, trying to stay calm before telling the team, "We have physical contact." The girl was there, but the report didn't stop there. The second sample, the blood smear on the wood, was analyzed immediately. The amount was too small for traditional blood typing, but more than enough for DNA. When the result appeared on screen, the entire lab froze. The blood matched perfectly with Kelsey's 1998 medical records. Zero margin of error. No coincidence, no mistake. The two most critical pieces, hair and blood, both belonged to the victim, and both were inside Garvey's hidden wall cavity. The full forensic report reached investigators the next morning. It carried an even heavier conclusion. The blood and hair had been in that cavity for a very long time, over 20 years. This was based on 1. Hemoglobin oxidation level in the blood sample. 2. Uneven dark brown discoloration. 3. Layered dust accumulation. 4. Hair desiccation level. 5. Complete sealing of the cavity for an extended period. 6. Rust condition of screws at cavity corners. The forensic expert concluded with the sentence that made everyone sit motionless. The cavity was first sealed around late 1999. Late 1999 hit the file like a knife through the dust of the past. Kelsey disappeared November 1999. Cavity first sealed, late 1999. Gap a few weeks, an undeniable overlap. The report went further. 2 distinct dust layers inside the cavity. Layer 1, old dust accumulated since the late 1990s. Layer 2, finer dust, indicating the cavity was reopened once sometime in the mid-2000s. This matched perfectly the newer screws Megan and the team had noticed. Someone reopened the wall after 2005. No one knew why. No one knew what was taken out or put in, but forensics confirmed at least 2 separate intrusions. The fabric scraps, button, keychain, and library card may belong to either period, but the blood and hair, only the first period, when the cavity was originally sealed. That led to the conclusion no one wanted to say aloud. The cavity was the site of first contact between victim and perpetrator, not a holding place, not the end, but the place that preserved the very first traces, the place Kelsey had been, even if only for a moment. The report also analyzed the cut carpet piece. Clean, straight cuts consistent with a cheap utility knife, the exact type widely sold in the late 1990s. The carpet had indeterminate stains. Further protein or occult blood testing would take time, but its mere presence with 3 personal items already told the story. It belonged to the 1999 event. After reading the 10-page forensic report, the entire team fell into a long silence. No one wanted to voice the conclusion, but it stood right in front of them. Walter Reed Garvey's house wasn't just connected to the disappearance, it was the starting point. Lewis closed the file, leaned back in his chair, and said in a voice like gravel, "Everything we found is evidence of the first time Kelsey was touched." Someone tried to hide it from the very beginning, but what chilled him most was the final forensic note. Screw rust levels and dust stratification indicate the cavity was reopened a second time approximately 2007, 2008, meaning, minus someone opened it the first time, sealed it late 1999. Someone opened it a second time more than 7 years later, then sealed it again. Who was the second person? Why? What were they looking for, or hiding? And most crucially, Garvey was the only person living in that house the entire time. Yet forensics couldn't say whose hand reopened the cavity, only that it had been reopened while Garvey was still alive. Finally Lewis set the file down, looked at his team, and said only, "This is no longer a missing person case. This is an assault case." But that was only the beginning, because forensics left one huge blank. How did the victim leave the house, and what happened after the wall cavity? That question would lead the team to the darkest part of the case, the part still hidden beyond the wall. When the forensic report on the wall cavity was forwarded to the materials analysis section, technicians didn't focus only on hair, blood, and personal items. They paid special attention to the carpet scrap, the red thread, and microscopic dust clinging to the evidence, things the naked eye barely noticed. Among them was a tiny cluster of black dust stuck to the edge of the triangular carpet piece, something no one had initially noticed. Under the microscope it didn't look like ordinary household dust. Technicians isolated the sample and ran spectrometry. The result forced an immediate closed-door meeting with lead investigator Lewis. The cavity contains black polyethylene particles, whose structure and composition match the bedliner material used in 1997 GMC Sierra pickups. The conference room went silent for several seconds. Polyethylene isn't rare, but this specific formulation, with longitudinal fibers, high abrasion resistance, and a textured anti-slip surface, was almost exclusively used in the beds of 1996, 1998 GMC Sierras. Investigator Riley flipped back through the original 1999 file, ran her finger down the list of interviewed residents, and stopped on the name they had now seen too many times. Walter Reed Garvey, former owner of a dark green 1997 GMC Sierra pickup, a very common truck in that era. No one spoke, only the sound of pages turning. From one microscopic clue, black plastic dust on the carpet scrap, the dark-colored pickup, a witness vaguely remembered from 1999, suddenly returned like a ghost from the past. Lewis stood, walked to the whiteboard, circled 1997 GMC Sierra, dark green pickup, and wrote beneath it, material match, high probability. He remembered the 1999 report perfectly. One witness reported seeing a dark pickup parked not far from where Kelsey was last seen, but the statement had been dismissed as unreliable. The man only glimpsed it through fogged glass and TV reflection. No plate, no make, no driver visible. A dark truck in a Texas neighborhood was nothing special. It was removed from the main file, and for over 20 years, no one mentioned it again. But forensics doesn't forget, physics doesn't lie. The polyethylene bedliner from a 1997 GMC Sierra had a unique molecular signature, and what was found stuck to Kelsey's evidence inside Garvey's wall matched it almost perfectly. Riley exhaled. If that material is in the cavity, something once moved between the truck bed and this wall. Could be an object. Or, she didn't finish the sentence. No one needed to hear the rest. The next question was, where is Garvey's 1997 Sierra now? Vehicle records showed Garvey sold the truck in 2002 to an independent garage in Huntsville that specialized in buying old or quick-fix vehicles. The garage closed in 2011. The former owner died in 2013. Everything looked like a dead end, until a young detective dug into old DMV files and discovered the Sierra had been sold again in 2003 to a man named Monty Flores. Shortly afterward, the truck was in an accident and sent to Northside Salvage Yard. Lewis called immediately, and the yard confirmed they still had the bare frame in the unprocessed inventory because some interior parts were still sellable. A rare gift in a cold case, the 1999 suspect vehicle still existed. Early the next morning, the team arrived at Northside. Dawn hadn't fully broken, thick fog blanketed the rows of crushed cars, but the moment they stepped onto the lot, investigator Riley spotted the Sierra from 50 yards away. The body was heavily rusted, the bed dented, the windshield spider-webbed, but the polyethylene bedliner, the critical part, was still partially attached, worn, scratched, and sun-bleached with time. Lab techs in Tyvek suits began sterile sampling, sweeping surfaces, collecting plastic fragments from the bed seams. One moment made everyone's heart seize. On the left rear corner of the bed was a long curved scratch, the kind left when something soft is dragged hard across the textured surface, leaving a friction trail. The scratch carried a faint reddish-brown residue that had baked into tiny flakes. No one dared call it yet until forensics confirmed, but every investigator's gut said the same thing: that wasn't rust. It wasn't paint. It wasn't mud. It looked like fabric fiber. When the polyethylene particles collected from the wall cavity were compared to samples from the Sierra's bedliner, the match came back 87%, high enough for the lab to state they came from the same material, same production run, with an extremely low chance of coincidence from two separate sources. One investigator whispered, evidence from the cavity had direct contact with this truck bed. That opened a logical, horrifying hypothesis: Kelsey's belongings, or Kelsey herself, had been inside the bed of Garvey's GMC Sierra. Lewis stood in front of the rusted bed, staring at the textured surface, scarred by hundreds of marks, and understood the case had reached a new shore. No more vagueness, no more reliance on faded witness memories, no more gut feel clues like in 1999. This was physical evidence. Forensic material doesn't shift with human memory. It had sat there for over 20 years, waiting to be found. If the wall cavity held Kelsey's item, and the cavity contained polyethylene particles from a 1997 Sierra bedliner, and Garvey owned that exact 1997 Sierra when Kelsey vanished, then every line of investigation converged on one point. Garvey transported something, or someone, connected to Kelsey in that truck. The entire team felt the shift in the air. From a murky missing person case they now had victim blood in the wall, victim hair, personal belongings, material matching Garvey's truck bed, cavity sealed late 1999, Garvey's actual truck still available for analysis. All of it had started with one section of wall, and now the name Walter Reed Garvey, once just a faint 1999 person of interest, stood dead center in the storm of a cold case about to break wide open. But what Lewis kept turning over in his mind wasn't what did Garvey hide in the wall. It was where did whatever Garvey carried in that truck bed end up? That question would lead them to the next part, where the truth finally began crawling out of the dark. When the 1997 GMC Sierra was dragged out of its corner at Northside Salvage Yard, where it had sat untouched for nearly 2 decades, every investigator present felt like they were opening a door straight back to 1999. The frame was almost completely rotted, paint peeling in sheets, most parts stripped, but the bed, the part that mattered, was still intact. Time had ravaged it, but forensics didn't care about looks. They cared about the inner surface, where plastic particles, fabric fibers, dirt, scratches, and anything that had ever touched the distinctive polyethylene liner might still cling. The techs set up a tent, established a sterile zone, and flooded the bed with high-intensity lights. Cold white light raked across the textured surface, highlighting every gouge and foreign speck in the grooves. Investigator Riley stepped forward first, gloved, and knelt by the bed. She said nothing. Words were unnecessary. When her fingertip brushed a groove containing a microscopic red thread, she looked at Lewis. No further explanation needed. The thread was identical to the red stitching found in the wall cavity, the kind that only appears when hoodie fabric is torn or violently abraded. A tech slid a glass slide under the groove, and with ultra-fine tweezers, lifted out a light brown fiber speck. He sealed it in an evidence bag. Could be hair, he said. Or fabric, Riley answered, but her eyes betrayed the tension. Everyone knew what it would mean if this fiber matched the hair from the wall cavity. Next, the tech sprayed luminol across the bed, standard procedure, though after 2 decades, no one expected anything. But when the reagent reacted in several spots along the left bed rail, a faint blue glow appeared like a scar under the metal skin. Hold, Lewis said quietly, voice tight with shock. No one had expected luminol to react after all this time, but it did, weak, ghostly, but unmistakable. Riley studied the glowing rail. This pattern, she said, looks like drip trails, not spatter. Drip trails. In a pickup bed, exactly where they'd already noted the curved drag mark. The tech explained. Even though the blood was long degraded, original proteins can still react under perfect preservation conditions. This fit a late 1990s deposit. Samples were taken, packaged, labeled. Riley ran a gloved hand along the bed rail. At one small dent, almost a puncture, she asked for angled light. That's when they saw a tiny fleck of deep red plastic jammed deep in a metal seam, no bigger than a fingernail clipping. The tech examined it under a loupe and looked up immediately. This is synthetic hoodie polymer, cheap blend. The kind sold to students 1996, 1999. Megan Rowland had said the wall fabric looked like a teenager hoodie from back then. The Hales had described Kelsey wearing a thin red hoodie, common style. One piece in the wall, one piece in the truck bed, 2 different sealed time periods. Same exact material. Deeper in the examination, forensics located 3 more hairs in the bed corners. One light brown, one short black, one very fine light blonde. No one jumped to conclusions, but 3 different hair colors in the bed of a man who lived alone, never gave rides, had no remaining family, and kept almost entirely to himself, was highly abnormal. How did these hairs get embedded this deep? Lewis asked. The tech shrugged. If they fell naturally, they wouldn't be wedged in the texture like this. This bed holds fibers when there's strong friction, like someone being dragged, held down, or struggling. Using new LED strip lighting, forensics discovered a flat, clear plastic particle deep in the front groove. The tech bolted upright. This is acrylic from a late 90s student ID card. Lewis felt ice down his spine. Kelsey's library card, found yellowed in the wall, still had its clear plastic sleeve. If the card had scraped the bed, it could have left an acrylic flake, meaning the card had been in the bed, and the only time that card left Kelsey's possession was the night she vanished. While scanning the bed floor with a magnetic sweep, they located one more surprise, a small bent metal piece under the dust. Removed and placed under the scope, it was part of a cheap earring back, the clip-on kind girls used in the 90s to pin hair or secure Walkman earbuds. The Hales had said Kelsey wore small silver oval clips, often to keep hair out of her face while walking. This clip fragment was oval. Riley rested a gloved hand on the bed, closed her eyes for a few seconds. It can't be coincidence. It just can't. Forensics also noted parallel abrasion marks along the right bed rail, width consistent with a human arm. Not animal claws. Not hard object slide. Fabric dragged hard across the texture. Lewis stepped back and updated the evidence board. Hoodie fabric, red thread, acrylic from library card, luminol positive drip trails, multiple hair colors, hair clip fragment, drag marks consistent with pulled fabric, all concentrated in one truck bed. Garvey's truck bed. He spoke slowly, every word deliberate. This bed didn't just carry something belonging to Kelsey, it may have carried Kelsey. The sentence dropped into the vast silent salvage yard, like a stone into a metal grave, but the biggest question still waited ahead. If the truck bed was the first stop after the wall cavity, where was Kelsey taken next? When forensics finished analyzing evidence from both the wall cavity and the 1997 GMC Sierra bed, another report quietly landed on lead investigator Lewis's desk, not as explosive as the blood or hair DNA, but heavy enough to trigger an emergency team meeting. It was the analysis of a faint fingerprint, found on the inside face of the wooden frame, inside the secret cavity. At first, no one had expected much from that print. It was barely a smudge, almost just an oil trace, on wood that had dried hard over 2 decades. But using modern multi-spectrum LED enhancement and lipid compound reconstruction, technicians rebuilt the ridge pattern piece by piece. After nearly 2 weeks of processing, they had enough for an AFIS search. The result made Lewis read it twice. The faint print from the cavity matched 87% to a known set belonging to Ethan Wayne Garvey, Walter Reed Garvey's biological nephew. Ethan. The name had appeared only once, fleetingly, in a 2000 neighbor statement. Occasionally saw a young man help Garvey with plumbing or carry stuff. No follow-up questions had been asked. There'd been no reason to treat him as a suspect then. But now a fingerprint, inside the secret cavity, where Kelsey's hair and blood were stored, belonged to Ethan. Lewis called the team into the conference room. The only document on the table was the forensic print report. No one spoke for the first few seconds. Riley broke the silence. Ethan came and went from Garvey's house, but a print inside the cavity means he touched the inside of that wall. A forensic tech nodded. That print isn't on the outer wall surface, it's on the inside face of the framing. It could only have been left while the cavity was open. The room sank into thought. If Ethan's fingerprint was inside the cavity, only 2 possibilities existed. 1. Ethan helped Garvey repair the wall, both in late 1999 and during the second opening in 2007, 2008. 2. Ethan touched the cavity in the context of hiding evidence. No one dared conclude, but no one ruled out the second option. Lewis ordered a full timeline rebuild. Cavity first opened and sealed late 1999. cavity reopened approx. 2007, 2008. Ethan's fingerprint inside the cavity. Ethan frequently visited Garvey's house. Garvey lived alone, never hired help. The facts lined up into a picture no one liked. To verify, the team started digging through old records, census files, receipts, DMV data, and decades-old neighbor statements. Scattered memories began to resurface. One neighbor recalled Ethan staying at Garvey's house for over a week in late 1999 to get away from trouble with his parents. A former neighborhood teen remembered Ethan regularly driving Garvey's Sierra a few times a month. A woman who lived across the street said she once saw two figures when the light in Garvey's back room came on one night in late 1999. All of it had been dismissed as unimportant before, but now, with forensics confirming Kelsey-related evidence inside the cavity, those statements took on new meaning. Lewis ordered Ethan's full file pulled. Born 1981, 19 years younger than Garvey, unstable work and living history, frequent job changes, no serious criminal record, only traffic violations, lived in Conroe for several years before moving to Huntsville in 2008, no contact with remaining family after Garvey's death, a background that wasn't criminal, but was strangely empty, no red flags, yet no stability either, the kind of person who could vanish from society's radar for years without anyone noticing. Investigator Riley asked, if Garvey did something in 1999, did Ethan know? Or if Ethan was involved, did Garvey cover for him? Lewis didn't answer. He just stared at the original fingerprint photo, the faint oil smudge on damp wood, and understood that whoever left that print had stood inside the cavity, touching that wall, while it was open, and that cavity had only been opened twice in 24 years. Forensics kept working on one of the items. Kelsey's rubber bracelet was a very faint tiny grip mark. The ridge detail was unclear, but the lab noted shape similarity to Ethan's known prints. No one called it proof, but it was another pointer, and every pointer was now aimed at someone who hadn't even been on the original radar. Lewis ended the meeting with 3 lines on the board. Ethan was inside Garvey's house in 1999. Ethan was present when the cavity was opened. Ethan's fingerprint is in the space that held Kelsey's evidence. He underlined the last line and said slowly, Garvey wasn't keeping this secret alone. Someone else was right there with him. And that someone's name, after 24 years, had finally stepped into the investigative light. Ethan Wayne Garvey was no longer a faded name in an old file. He was now the first real suspect forensics had dragged out of the darkness of the Kelsey Hale case. Once Ethan Wayne Garvey's name officially moved to the center of the file, the very first thing the team had to do was reconstruct the entire timeline of the night of November 12, 1999. The night Kelsey vanished. 24 years had passed. Files were torn, photos blurred, statements tangled, but this time they weren't rebuilding it on human memory alone. They had forensics, they had technology, and most importantly, they had a new suspect to cross-check against. Lead investigator Lewis ordered a complete sweep. Every receipt, transaction, expired surveillance tape, old mail, statements once pushed aside. Nothing was too small. 1999 receipt, the unexpected kickoff. No one thought a 1999 lumber receipt still existed, but Megan Rowland, the new homeowner, accidentally found it in Garvey's old drawer. The receipt clearly stated, November 16, 1999. Garvey purchased 2 sheets of drywall and 1 box of screws from a hardware store near TX 105. Garvey had told police that year he was fixing the wood floor, yet the receipt showed he bought wall repair materials, the exact location where the secret cavity was later discovered. Lewis tapped the faded date. 4 days after Kelsey disappeared, Garvey replaced the wall. That receipt became the first solid piece. Old Randall's grocery security footage. Riley requested the surveillance tape from the store where Kelsey bought snacks that night. The store had upgraded cameras several times, but the old owner still had a box of moldy VHS tapes in storage. One segment was recoverable. Video forensics ran noise reduction and contrast enhancement. The image was still poor, but clear enough to show a dark-colored vehicle parked at the edge of the lot, as Kelsey walked out. No plate, no clear make. But when the darkest pixels at the front were enlarged, the computer reconstructed the distinctive hood slope of a 1997 GMC Sierra. No one claimed 100%, but Riley said, "This truck looks a lot like Garvey's Sierra." The image lined up perfectly with the moment Kelsey left the store, around 8:50 p.m. Dismissed 1999 statement. Witness saw two people buried in the original file was a statement crossed out in red pen. I saw a girl and a young man on Longmire Road. Reason for dismissal. Witness unsure of exact time. The team compared it to Ethan's age in 1999. 18 years old. A young man, slim build, often wore a baseball cap. Everything matched the vague description. Riley said, if it had been Garvey, the witness would have said an older man. They said young man. Another piece clicked. Manual 1999 location data. Back then there were no smartphones or GPS, but one thing few people thought of, gas receipts. Lewis ordered a search of 1999 transactions from the only station where Ethan used his parents' card. A faded copy from archives showed November 12, 1999. 7:41 p.m. Ethan filled up near Longmire Road. This proved Ethan was in the Conroe area the exact night Kelsey vanished. 5 minutes drive from Randall's grocery, 3 minutes from Garvey's house. The distances lined up chillingly. Old police radio log. Another surprise came from a source no one expected still existed. The archived radio traffic from that night. One entry at 9:20 p.m. Report of a dark pickup driving unusually slow on Longmire Road. Nearest unit check. No unit ever responded. They were tied up on another call. But a dark pickup appeared. Same location where Kelsey was last seen. Lewis circled it in red. Unusually slow. Same stretch. Same window. Garvey's old mechanic. Crucial clue, a former mechanic who worked on Garvey's Sierra, told investigators during an interview that nephew of his, Ethan, drove that truck a lot, sometimes all night. All night, matching the gap between Kelsey leaving the store and the family calling police. Reconstructed timeline. From every fragment, receipts, video, statements, gas purchase, radio log. The team built the clearest timeline possible. 7:41 p.m. Ethan fills gas near Longmire Road. 8:50 p.m. Kelsey leaves Randall's grocery. 8:52 p.m. Camera captures truck resembling GMC Sierra in lot 9 o'clock. 9:10 p.m. Witness sees young man and girl on Longmire Road. 9:20 p.m. Police receive report of slow-moving dark pickup. 9:30 p.m. Family starts worrying. Can't reach her. 10 p.m. No further sightings of Kelsey on her route. 11 p.m. Family calls police. When the timeline appeared on the big screen in the investigation room, the team fell silent. Every data point revolved around Longmire Road, the 1997 Sierra, and Ethan Garvey, present at the exact time, exact place, with the exact vehicle. Lewis stared at the board and exhaled. We went from no suspects to one fingerprint, and now a complete timeline. But the biggest question remained unanswered. If Ethan was there that night, what was Garvey's role, and what happened after Kelsey disappeared from Longmire Road? The answer would lead straight into the next part, where the full truth finally began to surface from things found, not inside Garvey's house, but in a completely different place. Once the 1999 timeline was locked in and Ethan Garvey became the new focus of the investigation, the team knew they needed a second location, beyond the house and the Sierra, where Garvey or Ethan might have hidden or moved something after 1999. And the most critical clue came from a copied old storage unit rental agreement found in a box of Garvey's papers. It was a receipt from Conroe Lock and Store, a small facility right off TX 105, only an 8-minute drive from Garvey's house. According to facility records, Garvey rented unit C17 from March 2000 to December 2002, then abruptly stopped paying and let the unit go into lien. Normally, after 90 days of non-payment the unit would have been auctioned, but Garvey showed up with back fees just before the sale, the contract was reinstated, and the unit was never opened. That single act accidentally turned it into a time capsule, a sealed space untouched for over 20 years. Lewis signed the search warrant in under 3 minutes. Unit C-17, the heir of the past. When the lock was cut, and the green metal door rolled up, it revealed a thick, solid darkness inside. No light, no heavy mildew smell, just the scent of old dust and long-sealed wood. Flashlights clicked on, sweeping a narrow space barely wider than a small car. The first thing they saw was a large wooden crate pushed against the wall, coated in dust. It wasn't ordinary furniture. This was the kind of crate used to ship heavy items, or to hide something inside. The surface bore long scratches, as if it had been dragged or struck repeatedly. To the left of the crate was a rolled-up moving blanket, the heavy type used to wrap furniture. Next to it, a pair of women's size 7 sneakers, laces frayed, soles almost dust-free, completely out of place in a unit where everything else was buried under inches of dust. The detail gave investigator Riley chills. Someone placed these shoes here after the dust had already settled. Behind them was a roll of industrial duct tape, yellowed with age. Everything looked random, but Lewis's gut told him nothing in Unit C-17 was accidental. Every object had its own story. The wooden crate, the heart of the unit. Forensics moved forward, photographing, measuring, then pried open the crate lid. It resisted as if it hadn't been touched in decades, but finally gave way. No body, no large items, just a thin blanket lining the bottom, with numerous small dark circular stains, marks of something once placed there and later removed. But the most important thing wasn't inside the crate, it was on the rim. A tech aimed an LED light close and exclaimed, "Blood spatter." Tiny specks, almost invisible to the naked eye, but enough for the hemoglobin kit to turn faint blue. Lewis leaned in. "Not fresh blood." The tech nodded. "Deeply oxidized, most likely late 1990s. They swabbed. Everyone already knew whose DNA they expected. The moving blanket's secret path, the rolled blanket outside the crate, also showed anomalies. Riley spread it on the unit floor. One section had curved scratch marks, identical in shape to the drag marks found in the Sierra's bed. She muttered, "Same object, rubbed against both the truck bed and this blanket." Forensics confirmed, polyethylene particles on the blanket were identical to the 1997 GMC Sierra bed liner, meaning, whatever was wrapped in this blanket, had been in Garvey's truck bed, then was brought to the storage unit. But what was the whatever? No one in the unit voiced the hypothesis rising in their minds. No one wanted to. The second person's fingerprint on the heel of the women's size 7 sneakers. Forensics found a smudged partial print, not Garvey's. When run through the database, the result came back fast. Fingerprint matches Ethan Wayne Garvey, not 40%, not 70%, 92% match, enough for positive identification. The person who handled those shoes was Ethan. 2 prints in the wall cavity had already tied Ethan to the house. Now a print in the storage unit proved Ethan had been here too. Lewis gripped the file so hard the edges crumpled. "Ethan didn't just know about the wall cavity," he said quietly. "He knew about this unit, and he's known for a long time." The forensic tech examined the old duct tape. On the sticky edge they found red fabric fibers identical to Kelsey's hoodie. One more detail left Riley speechless. On the blanket lay a single long light brown hair. Quick field test. Highly likely human, highly likely female. The sample was rushed to the lab. DNA result, the knockout blow. It took almost 4 hours for the preliminary report. When the lab tech walked into the unit, his face was pale. "We have the hair result from the blanket." The team froze. He spoke slowly, every word deliberate. "DNA is a 100% match to Kelsey Briar Hale." Silence. Not a sound, only the old crate creaking faintly, as if exhaling. Riley was the first to speak, voice breaking. "So, she was here." Forensics added, "Not just present. The hair loss timing matches late 1999, based on keratin degradation." Lewis placed a hand on the cold wooden crate that had guarded a secret for 2 decades. "The wall cavity was the first stop," he said, "but the storage unit may have been the second." Connecting the pieces in under 72 hours, they now had Kelsey's hair in Garvey's wall cavity, Kelsey's blood in the wall cavity, Kelsey's hoodie fabric, matching red thread, library card acrylic in the truck bed, blood, evidence in the truck bed, Kelsey's hair in the storage unit, Ethan's prints in the wall cavity, Ethan's prints on the women's size 7 shoes, moving blanket matching the truck bed material. Every piece pointed the same direction. Kelsey had been moved through 3 locations: Garvey's house, Garvey's truck bed, and the storage unit Garvey rented, in an extremely short window after her disappearance. Riley looked at Lewis and said what the entire team understood, but no one had dared voice. She never left Conroe that night. Lewis gave a small nod, and 2 people knew it, Walter and Ethan. Now only one question remained, the one forensics could not answer. After storage unit #C17, where was Kelsey taken? The forensic results from storage unit #C17 irreversibly changed the direction of the case. Every piece of evidence, hair, fabric, blanket, blood, fingerprints, proved Kelsey had been moved through 3 locations before vanishing from all traces for 24 years. But there was a 4th location, faint in the old files, that no one had considered until investigator Riley found a land lease receipt buried in a box of Garvey's tax papers. It was a contract for a small riverside plot on the San Jacinto River, in a remote area near FM 242, about a 25-minute drive from Conroe. Garvey had leased the land from 1998 to 2001, the time frame overlapping chillingly with Kelsey's disappearance. Lewis read the contract 3 times, then set it down. This could be the end of the route. They obtained a search warrant for the property, now city managed after the previous owner died with no heirs. Survey team, forensics, cadaver dogs, and a geo-excavation unit were dispatched the next morning. San Jacinto River bank, the shadow of 24 years waiting the plot Garvey once rented sat off a red dirt trail, surrounded by thick underbrush and old pines drooping like they were hiding something beneath. The smell of mud, water and long decay hung so heavy several team members paused to steady their breathing. Pushing through the brush, they saw a slight depression in the ground, evidence of an area once dug and then filled back in. No one spoke, but everyone knew this wasn't coincidence. Lewis said quietly, "Start with the cadaver dogs." 2 HRD dogs were released on long leads working tight circles. Less than 5 minutes later, the first dog froze, scratched hard at one spot, then barked, the alert for long decomposed human remains. A second alert came a few yards away, a third near the edge of a bamboo clump. 3 hits, same zone. Lewis looked at forensics and said, "Only dig. First layer, river mud." As the excavation team removed the top layer, they realized the area had been dug by hand, not machine. The soil was odd, newer topsoil over older tightly compacted earth, as if something heavy had once pressed it down before it was smoothed over. Forensics probed with rods. Within minutes one struck something solid. Something down here. They widened the pit. First layer of mud, pushed aside. Second layer revealed, pale, drier soil. At roughly 70 centimeters depth, a tech called out, "Fabric," a rotted scrap of red cloth, so fragile it almost disintegrated when touched. Riley whispered, "Hoodie." No one dared confirm yet, but they knew. Second layer, the wooden box digging deeper, a shovel blade hit wood. Forensics switched to hand tools to preserve evidence. A smaller wooden box emerged, not the crate from storage, but a different one, partially rotted. When the lid was carefully lifted, an ancient earthy smell rose, not strong decay anymore, but something very human. Inside the box, a crumpled piece of denim fabric, a rusted metal necklace, a shard of clear acrylic plastic, and what silenced everyone, a small bone shaped like a human wrist bone. Forensics didn't need to guess, they immediately began sealing the scene. Third layer, what everyone feared most after nearly 2 hours of careful expansion, a tech shouted, "Bones. We have bones." Lewis and Riley ran over. More than a meter down, human bones began appearing under the work lights. First a femur, then an arm bone, then ribs, shattered into pieces, showing signs of blunt force trauma. Finally the skull, lying on its side in the dirt. The back of the cranium bore a clear fracture consistent with massive impact. No one spoke. Wind whispered through the pines like a 24-year sigh. Forensics gently touched a bone, and said, "Female, approximately 16, 20 years old, Time of death consistent with 1999. Riley turned away, fighting to stay composed. Lewis didn't turn away. He stared straight at the skull slowly emerging, and said softly, almost to himself, "Kelsey, forensic confirmation." Voice from beneath the soil. It took nearly 7 hours to recover every bone fragment, every scrap of fabric, every grain of surrounding soil. Some hand bones showed traces of industrial duct tape residue, identical to the roll found in the storage unit. On the red fabric, wrapped tight around the ribs, were white fibers, matching the women's size 7 sneakers, recovered from Unit #She-17. But the strongest evidence was an intact lower molar, still covered in enamel. When the mobile field kit ran a preliminary DNA swab from the tooth, the technician announced the result everyone already knew but still couldn't breathe for. DNA is a 100% match to the profile of Kelsey Briar Hale. Riley covered her mouth. Lewis bowed his head, gripping his cap so hard his knuckles went white, eyes closed for several long seconds. 24 years, and Kelsey was finally found. Not in Louisiana, not in Galveston, not in any of the baseless rumor locations. She had been right here in Conroe. Right on the riverbank Garvey once leased. Right where no one had ever thought to look, until forensics opened the door to the truth. As the sun dropped behind the pines, the last light of day painted the excavation site red. Lewis stood staring into the empty pit where Kelsey's remains had lain. "Garvey didn't act alone," he said, voice low like gravel falling into water. Riley nodded. "And now we know where it ended. Now there's only one question left." Lewis looked up, eyes reflecting the dying sunset. Who ended it? That question pushed the case into a new phase, where the truth about Garvey, Ethan, and that fateful night in 1999 would be peeled back layer by layer. Once Kelsey's complete remains were transported to the medical examiner's office, the forensic team continued sifting every speck of dirt, fabric, and blanket. They knew that at this stage, any single piece of evidence could be the final key, or the one that rewrote the entire investigation. And it was. The next morning, while re-examining the evidence bag containing the rotted fabric scraps, next to the small wooden box from the grave, a technician discovered a tiny metal object caked in soil and heavily worn by time. At first everyone assumed it was just a nail or scrap iron, but after cleaning in a special solution, its shape became clear: a men's dress shirt collar stay, nickel alloy, the type common on 1990s office shirts. Investigator Riley immediately checked Garvey's clothing records. He almost exclusively wore flannel, cheap work shirts, and never anything with polished nickel collar stays. Ethan even less so. His teenage style was t-shirts, hoodies, and occasional cheap denim shirts. Neither man owned shirts with this kind of hardware. Forensics analyzed the surface and found traces of gray fabric, polyester cotton blend, typical of mid-range office shirts, not flannel or denim. More crucially, wedged in the stay's slot was a microscopic skin cell smear, tiny but enough for DNA. When the result came back, the entire command room went dead silent. The DNA on the collar stay did not match Garvey, did not match Ethan, did not match the victim. A completely new genetic profile, an additional individual present where Kelsey's remains were buried. Lewis braced both hands on the table, eyes locked on the report. There was a third person at San Jacinto. Riley studied the stay under the magnifier and said, "This didn't fall in by accident. It was in the soil layer right beside the arm bones, meaning it dropped there the moment Kelsey was buried." Geological analysis confirmed it. The stay was in the original 1999 disturbed layer, not later fill. It could not belong to a passerby, could not have blown in later, could not be contamination. It came from someone standing directly in that hole in 1999. Lewis whispered, "Garvey wasn't alone. Ethan wasn't either. There was someone else, someone who stood with them that night." Expanding the search, they re-examined every name from the old files: Ethan's friends, Garvey's former co-workers, neighbors, repairmen, but none matched the new DNA. However, one forgotten 2000 statement suddenly stood out. A witness recalled Garvey occasionally fishing or drinking by the river with a strange man, not family, in the late 1990s. The witness couldn't remember a name, only that the man was tall, thin, and usually wore light gray dress shirts. Riley looked down at the collar stay, nickel finish, style fabric traces, all matching the description. Lewis closed the file, voice heavy as lead. If that man was on the riverbank back then, odds are he's our third person. They didn't have a name yet, didn't have a face, didn't know his role, but forensics had just revealed a truth no one saw coming. The Kelsey Hale case wasn't just Garvey and Ethan, there was another shadow, a man never mentioned in any investigation for 24 years, and from that single rusted collar stay, the team began hunting the third man, the final piece of the 1999 darkness. The moment the collar stay DNA result appeared, Lewis knew it was time to bring Ethan Garvey in for questioning. Not an arrest, there still wasn't enough for charges, but a lawful, expanded witness interview. Ethan arrived voluntarily, yet the way he walked in, shoulders rigid, hands buried in pockets, eyes avoiding every camera, told everyone he knew exactly why he was there. Small interview room, cold white light, 2 silent recording cameras. Riley sat across from Ethan. Lewis stood behind, arms folded, watching. Ethan tried to sound calm. "You said you wanted to ask about my grandfather. I already told you, I don't know anything about that." Riley didn't answer. She opened a large envelope and slid out the first photo, close-up of the faint fingerprint, inside the secret wall cavity. "Know what this is?" Ethan glanced and shrugged. "No, just a wall." Riley placed the second photo, the women's size 7 sneakers from the storage unit. "This?" Ethan stared longer but kept his face blank. "Never seen them." Riley didn't argue. She simply laid the fingerprint report on the table, bold line screaming, "Match. Ethan Garvey, 92% positive." Ethan froze. His eyes shifted from bored to wary. He licked his lips, fingers tightening on the chair edge. "No way," he said under his breath. "I never touched whatever you're talking about." Lewis stepped forward and placed another photo, the moving blanket from the storage unit, where Kelsey's hair and truck bed particles were found. "This blanket," Lewis said, "has your clear prints. No mistake." Ethan looked down. His silence spoke louder than any denial. Riley pressed, "We found Kelsey's DNA in the unit you visited, her clothing in the house, her hair in the truck you drove, and now your fingerprints at the exact place she was held." Ethan swallowed hard. "It wasn't me. I was just there because my granddad asked. He told me to clean up." "Clean up what?" Riley asked. "I don't remember." Riley tilted her head, voice ice cold. "You remember, you just don't want to say." Ethan's fingers dug into the table edge. "1 second, 2, then he exploded. "I only helped my granddad fix the wall, that's all. Everything else, that was his." Lewis sat down and placed the final piece of evidence on the table, the photo of the collar stay from the grave. "This doesn't belong to your granddad," Lewis said, "and it doesn't belong to you." Ethan stared at the stay. The forced smile vanished. "We have a third person's DNA," Riley said. "Do you know whose it is?" Ethan turned away, jaw clenched, throat working. Lewis saw the crack and struck. "That person was with you that night. With your granddad. With Kelsey." Ethan tapped the table lightly. "No, it wasn't like you think." "Then how was it?" Riley pressed. Ethan went silent. Lewis leaned closer. "You can be charged as an accessory if you keep protecting the third man. But if you tell the truth, that's the biggest mitigating factor you'll ever get." Ethan trembled. He looked at the 2 investigators, the fight in his eyes starting to fracture. Riley said nothing more. She simply placed the photo of Kelsey's remains on the table. "This girl was 17. She did nothing wrong. The person who ended her life is still out there, and you know who he is." Ethan stared at the bones. His eyelids twitched uncontrollably. He drew a deep breath, then spoke in a choked voice. "He wasn't my friend. I didn't choose him. My granddad brought him in. He used to work with my granddad on old job sites." Riley and Lewis exchanged a quick look. "Give us his name." Ethan closed his eyes. "I only ever knew him as Ray." Lewis wrote it down instantly. "Ray who? I don't know his last name. Just that he always wore gray dress shirts, and my granddad trusted him." Riley pushed one step further. "Was he there that night?" Ethan opened red-rimmed eyes. Yes. The room sank into heavy silence. Ethan dropped his head, hands shaking slightly. My granddad told me I just had to keep quiet, that it was already done, that no one would ever find out. Ray was the one who did it. Lewis stood straight. The third man has a name. Ethan didn't look up, only forced out one last sentence like it burned his throat. My granddad's dead, but he's still alive. The interview ended with Ethan's complete collapse, and the emergence of a new shadowy name that dragged the investigation into its final darkness. Ray, the man in the gray dress shirt, the third person on the San Jacinto riverbank in 1999, and now the team had to find him, before he disappeared again. When Ethan Garvey left the interview room completely drained, the investigators no longer had any reason to delay the next step. His statement, though not a full confession, combined with the forensics from Garvey's house, the truck bed, the storage unit, and the San Jacinto riverbank gravesite had crossed every legal threshold required for an arrest. The next morning an arrest warrant was signed. Ethan Garvey was taken into custody at the cheap rental apartment in Huntsville, where he had lived quietly for 15 years. When the officers arrived, he offered no resistance. He simply stood there, hands trembling slightly, staring at the cracked concrete floor. You are under arrest for involvement in the kidnapping and death of Kelsey Briar Hale in 1999. Ethan said nothing, asked nothing, did not immediately request an attorney. He only repeated one vague sentence, as if speaking to himself, my granddad made me stay quiet. The indictment, a forensic wall impossible to breach. The Montgomery County Prosecutor's Office immediately held a press conference. The entire town of Conroe, a place that had always been quiet, exploded in whispers, text messages, and stunned disbelief. The 17-year-old girl who vanished in 1999 hadn't disappeared mysteriously as everyone once believed. It wasn't a runaway teen or an unsolved missing person case. Behind it was a criminal structure that had lasted more than 2 decades, and forensics had now pieced it together with merciless precision. Lead prosecutor, Linda Rasmussen, known for her airtight no-frills, evidence-only style, spent over a month preparing with her team to reconstruct the entire chain of events, based on Kelsey's hair DNA in the wall cavity, Kelsey's blood in the cavity, hoodie fabric fibers in the cavity, and truck bed, library card acrylic particles in the truck bed, moving blanket plus Kelsey's hair in the storage unit, Ethan's fingerprints in the cavity, plus on the shoes, Ethan's fingerprints in the storage unit, timeline proving Ethan's presence at the exact time, Ethan's admission of the existence of Ray, Kelsey's remains buried on land once leased by Garvey, industrial duct tape residue, matching the roll in storage, evidence that Garvey and Ethan reopened the wall cavity a second time. All of it formed an unbreakable logical chain. Kelsey Garvey's wall cavity, 1997, Sierra Bed Storage Unit. San Jacinto, Riverbank. Ethan's traces were at every single point. The trial, the day the truth came out. Montgomery County Court opened the trial of Ethan Garvey in spring 2024. On the first day, hundreds showed up. Many had known Kelsey from high school, many were Conroe residents who loved the Hale family. And of course, the Hale family was there. When Ethan was led into the courtroom, every conversation stopped. He kept his head down, long hair partly covering his face, thinner than in his file photos. He never looked at anyone, not even the Hales. The prosecution opened with a sentence that silenced the room. This is not a missing person case. This is a planned crime, hidden behind 2 decades of silence and drywall. Rasmussen walked through the evidence step by step, following the forensic timeline, wall cavity, first contact. She projected images, dried blood, hair strands, hoodie button, torn red fabric, all bearing Kelsey's DNA, and all bearing the defendant's fingerprints. Ethan bowed his head lower. 2. Truck bed, transport. Rasmussen showed luminol reaction photos from the 1997 Sierra bed. Kelsey's blood was in the bed of the truck the defendant drove regularly. No coincidence possible. 3. Storage unit. holding and transfer stage photos of the women's size 7 shoes, the moving blanket, the duct tape roll. On screen she enlarged the DNA results. Kelsey's hair on the blanket. Ethan Garvey's fingerprints on the shoes. This was the second place the girl was taken. The gallery began to murmur. 4. San Jacinto Riverbank. The end. Rasmussen projected excavation photos. No one spoke. Some bowed their heads. Some cried. No speculation needed. No theories required. Kelsey's remains were on land Garvey and the defendant frequented, in soil that could only have been disturbed in 1999. The defense. A feeble resistance. Ethan's attorney tried to argue. Ethan only followed his grandfather's orders. Ethan was not the primary perpetrator. Ethan did not intend to cause death. The third man played a larger role, but Rasmussen countered, that may be true. Garvey and the third man were involved, but the facts do not change. Ethan Garvey touched crime scene #1, touched crime scene #2, and was present at the final scene. Not a single stage occurred without the defendant's involvement. There is no criminal act the primary perpetrator committed that the defendant did not help facilitate. The jury looked at the forensic chain and understood the truth wasn't in words, but in the dust, the blood, the DNA that had stayed silent for 24 years. The testimony that broke. When called to the stand, Ethan sat clutching his hands until the knuckles went white. Prosecution asked, "Were you on Longmire Road that night?" "Yes." "Were you at Garvey's house?" "Yes." "Did you open the wall cavity?" "Yes." "Did you go to the storage unit?" "Yes." While Kelsey was still alive, Ethan bit his lip until it bled. The entire courtroom held its breath. I'm not sure. When you dug the hole at San Jacinto, was Kelsey still alive?" Ethan broke down sobbing. His shoulders shook violently. "I never touched her. I didn't. It was him. You knew who, but you didn't save her. You didn't call police. You helped hide her." Ethan could no longer answer, only choked sobs echoed through the courtroom. The verdict. Final silence. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury returned. Ethan Garvey was found guilty of second-degree murder, complicity, kidnapping, tampering with and concealing evidence, obstruction of justice. Total sentence, 50 years imprisonment, no parole before 35 years. When the judge read the sentence, Ethan never raised his head, never looked at the Hale family, never looked at anyone. He said only one thing, voice shattered. "I'm sorry. I couldn't save her." No one in the courtroom knew whether that apology was sincere or just the last remnant of a haunted soul, but the truth was still missing one piece, a name Ethan had only dared utter in 2 syllables, Ray. When sentencing ended, and Ethan Garvey was led away, the Kelsey Briar Hale case, the disappearance that had haunted the city of Conroe since 1999, finally reached its official conclusion. But for the Montgomery County cold case team, closing the case was not the end. It was the moment they had to look back at the entire journey, what allowed a seemingly simple case to stay buried in darkness for 24 years, and what finally let the truth surface, late but complete. Lewis gathered the whole team in the conference room, for the first time in over a year since the file was reopened. He laid out every document, piece of evidence, forensic report, and interview transcript on the table, arranged in order from 1999 to 2024. "We need to understand," he said, "why this case took 2 decades, why no one found it back then, why we found it now." The answer wasn't one single mistake, it was 2 completely different eras of investigation. What 1999 forensics couldn't do that 2024 could. Lewis pointed to each line in the report. Hair DNA in 1999 was nearly useless without the root bulb. Oxidized blood in the wall cavity couldn't be typed with the kits available then. Polyethylene particles from the truck bed had no molecular sourcing technology. Faint fingerprints couldn't be reconstructed with multispectrum lead enhancement. Old generation luminol wasn't sensitive enough to detect 24-year-old blood. GPS didn't exist. No cell phone location extraction. Blurry VHS footage couldn't be enhanced like today. Carpet protein transfer analysis didn't exist to prove contact sources. In other words, every clue that solved the case today was worthless junk in 1999. Technology was what kept the wall and the truck bed silent for 2 decades, and finally made them speak. The case was derailed from the very first days, when Kelsey vanished. Police at the time believed she might have run away, she might have been picked up by a boyfriend, she might have been abducted by a stranger. Garvey was only casually questioned, because he was a harmless old man who kept to himself. Ethan was dismissed as a troublemaking kid. The storage unit was unknown to anyone. The Riverside plot was never considered relevant. No forensics, no accurate timeline, no guiding trace evidence. The case drifted on witness memory, the weakest, most unreliable thing of all, and then it sank. The terrifying perfection of the cover-up Lewis underlined 4 big lines on the conference room screen. The wall cavity was sealed almost perfectly. 2. The body was wrapped, moved, buried in 3 separate stages. 3. Evidence was scattered. House, truck, storage riverbank, system. 4. 3 people were involved, diluting individual responsibility. If it had been a lone perpetrator, he makes mistakes, evidence concentrates in one place, easier to trace. But with 3 people, the crime was fragmented. No single person carried the full trail. That's why the case stood for 24 years. No one could see the whole picture. The breakthrough, layered forensics. The method used here is a new FBI and federal lab technique. Layered forensics, analysis by origin layers. Instead of looking for what belongs to the perpetrator, they looked for which pieces of evidence traveled together through the same chain. Example: red fabric, polyethylene dust, hair blood, acrylic blanket drag marks, and once everything lined up in one chain, forensics rebuilt the victim's journey through each sealed space. The FBI called this technique the breakthrough of the case. Why did this become a national case study? 3 reasons. A. Every type of forensic discipline appeared in this case. Nuclear DNA, dental DNA, Sifton print reconstruction, Sifton, next-gen luminol, Sifton, polymer and synthetic fiber analysis, Sifton, soil stratigraphy, Sifton, truck bed material, matching, Sifton, blunt force cranial trauma, Sifton, entomological burial time, estimation, cross-site trace evidence, movement between locations. Few cases contain such a complete forensic collection. 4 locations, 4 layers of truth. Most cases have 1 crime scene, 1 vehicle, 1 storage space. Kelsey's had 4 distinct layers: 1 wall cavity, initial contact, 2, 1997, GMC Sierra bed, transport, 3, storage unit hash, C17, temporary holding, 4, San Jacinto riverbank, final disposal. This created a rare, complex forensic structure. C. The crime was preserved by time. Not every old case still has evidence. Here, time accidentally preserved everything. Sealed wall cavity, preserved DNA. Storage unit unopened for 20 years, evidence untouched. Riverside soil, undisturbed remains, in original layered. Truck in salvage yard, never scrapped, polyethylene liner intact. This is one of the rare cold cases where time didn't destroy evidence, it protected it. The truth about the 24-year search at the final wrap-up meeting. Lewis said one sentence the entire team would never forget. It wasn't a hard case, it was literally buried. A simple statement, but it hit the core. Truth doesn't disappear, it's just locked behind layers of wood, dust, blanket, and dirt. And modern forensics, patient, disciplined people, peeled back every layer. The legacy of the case, the Kelsey Briar Hale case, is now part of FBI Advanced Cold Case Training Curriculum, National Institute of Justice Forensic Trace Evidence, Syllabus, National Criminal Investigation Academy Materials, University Forensic Science, Exemplar Lectures. It became nationwide study material, not for the brutality, but for how investigators persisted, were meticulous, never gave up, trusted forensics over human memory, and most importantly, they gave back a name, the truth, and a voice to a 17-year-old girl who vanished from a Conroe streetlight on a cold night in 1999. For 24 years, Kelsey never left Conroe. No one just knew where to look. Now every layer of soil has been opened. Every wall has been torn down. Every trace has been read. And justice, however late, arrived in a way American forensics calls one of the most complete trace evidence resolutions of a cold case in Texas history. Looking back at Kelsey's story in today's America, what haunts most isn't just the crime, but how silence and complacency let it survive for 24 years. A 17-year-old girl disappears on a familiar Conroe road, a hastily sealed drywall cavity in Walter Garvey's house, a 1997 GMC Sierra driving unusually slow on Longmire Road, a storage unit C-17, full of moving blankets, women's size 7 shoes and duct tape, a leased riverside plot on the San Jacinto, all of it right inside the community, in the middle of everyday American life. Yet for years neighbors saw Ethan coming and going from Garvey's house, saw the old man fishing with a gray-shirted man called Ray, saw the riverside plot dug up and smoothed over, and no one connected the dots. No one made one extra phone call. The lesson for America today is concrete. Community safety isn't only the police's job, it's everyone's responsibility. If a pickup keeps driving slowly around the neighborhood, if someone suddenly replaces a wall, or does secretive repairs after a disappearance, if a teenager like Ethan gets pulled into family secrets, citizens have the right and the duty to report, to ask questions, to refuse silence. This story also reminds America that investing in forensics, preserving records, and never abandoning cold cases is critical. It was the DNA from a hair in the wall, plastic dust from the Sierra bed, a faint print on size 7 shoes, riverbank soil that gave the victim her voice back. In a vast society where misinformation spreads fast, the Kelsey case is a serious reminder. Trust science, trust process, trust reporting things that feel off, and never treat a missing person as just someone else's family business. If you respect the 24-year journey to find justice for Kelsey, after being buried in darkness, please hit subscribe to walk with us through the next stories of justice. Thank you for staying until the end, and see you in the next video, where we keep bringing light to cases time once tried to hide.